My wife kissed me goodbye this morning like everything was normal. I had already read every message on her backup phone I found in her car last night. My wife kissed me on the cheek this morning, grabbed her coffee, and said, "Love you. Have a good day." Like she hadn't spent the last 4 months planning an entire second life behind my back. I said, "You too, babe." Then I watched her car pull out of the driveway and went back inside to reread the 312 text messages I'd already screenshotted at 1 a.m. the night before. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because this one gets messy. And I mean legally, financially, spiritually messy. Let me back up. I'm Daniel, 34, married to Melissa, 32, for 6 years, together for 9. We met in college, did the whole slow build romance thing, got married in a barn wedding she'd pinned on a mood board since she was 19. No kids yet. We'd been trying to get financially stable first. Her words, repeated at every family dinner for 3 years running. I own a small HVAC repair business. She works in medical device sales. On paper, we were the couple everyone said had it figured out. 2 nights ago, her car wouldn't start. Battery, we assumed. I went out to jump it for her before she left for a work dinner she said was mandatory. Popped the hood, hooked up the cables, and when I reached into the glove box for her registration to check something with the insurance, I found a phone. Not her phone. A phone. Cheap little prepaid thing, cracked case, tucked under a stack of napkins, and an old parking ticket like it belonged there, like it was nothing. I stood in the driveway holding it for a solid minute before I even turned it on. Some part of me already knew. You don't hide a second phone in your glove box because you're planning a surprise party. It wasn't locked. First mistake on her part. I opened the messages and there was exactly one thread, saved under the name Pilates. I want to be honest, I almost laughed. Pilates. Real subtle, Melissa. I started reading. And reading. And reading. 4 months of messages between my wife and a man named Grant, who, as it turned out, was her regional manager at work. Not even a stranger. Someone I'd shaken hands with at her company holiday party. Someone I'd complimented on his tie. The messages started innocent enough. Work stuff bleeding into personal stuff, the usual slow rot. Then they weren't innocent at all. Hotel confirmations. Him telling her he couldn't stop thinking about last Tuesday. Her telling him Daniel was working late again, so she had the whole night free. A message from 3 weeks ago where she said, "And I'm going to remember this one until I die. I already feel more like myself with you than I have in years with him." Years. Plural. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 45 minutes reading every single message twice. Then I photographed every screen, every timestamp, every hotel receipt she'd texted him for splitting costs, because apparently even affairs get Venmo'd these days. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, napkins on top, parking ticket where it was. Jumped her car like nothing happened. She came out 15 minutes later, thanked me, kissed me on the cheek, and drove off to her work dinner, which I now knew, thanks to a message sent 40 minutes earlier, was actually dinner with Grant at a steakhouse across town while his wife thought he was at a conference. Yeah, he's married too. Fantastic guy, truly. I didn't say a word that night. Didn't say a word the next morning either, when she came downstairs humming, made her coffee, kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, and left for work like she hadn't detonated our entire marriage in a Motel 6 parking lot text thread. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her back up, her car out of the driveway, and I thought, okay, fine. You want to play it like nothing's wrong? We'll play it like nothing's wrong. For now. Because here's the thing about me. I don't do scenes. I don't do screaming matches in kitchens. I do spreadsheets. I do paperwork. I do quiet, methodical, legally airtight destruction. The second she was out of the driveway, I called my brother-in-law, who happens to be a family law attorney 2 states over, purely because he wasn't going to be golfing with anyone who knew Melissa. Told him everything. He went quiet for a second, then said, "Document everything before you say a word to her. Screenshots, timestamps, financial records if you can get them." The second you confront her, she'll delete the evidence and start building a counter-narrative. You want to be 3 steps ahead before she even knows there's a race. Best advice I ever got. So that's what I did. For the next 5 days, I lived a double life of my own, except mine was legal and hers was in a Motel 6. Every night after she fell asleep, I went through that phone again, more carefully this time. Found out Grant had been putting her up in hotels using a corporate card meant for actual work travel, which, fun fact, is fraud against his own company. Found out they'd been talking about when things calm down, which apparently was code for when he divorced his wife and I divorced mine, and how they'd finally get their timeline. Found out she'd told him I was emotionally checked out and hadn't touched her in months, which was news to me, considering we'd had a completely normal Tuesday night 3 weeks prior that I now had to sit with in a very different context. I pulled our joint bank statements, found 4 hotel charges she'd explained away as work retreats and girls' trips over the last 4 months, totaling almost $3,000. Found a florist charge for $80 on a day I never got flowers. Found a jewelry store charge for a bracelet I never saw her wear. Turns out Grant got a bracelet. Grant's wife should really check his car, too, honestly. But that's not my problem. By day 5, I had a folder. A real one. Printed, tabbed, organized by date, sitting in my truck's center console because I didn't trust it in the house. My brother-in-law connected me with a divorce attorney in our state, a woman named Renata, who took one look at my folder during our first call and said, "This is one of the cleanest paper trails I've seen from someone who hasn't even filed yet. Most people bring me feelings. You brought me evidence," I said. "I like to be thorough." She said, "Good, because thorough wins." We drew up the paperwork over the next week while I kept smiling at breakfast and kissing my wife goodbye and asking how her day was, and she kept lying to my face with this casual little smile like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Honestly, watching her lie that smoothly after finding out the truth was almost impressive. Almost. It's a shame that talent didn't go toward literally anything else in her life. Renata's advice was simple. File first, serve second, freeze what you can before she knows it's coming. Our finances were mostly separate. Thank God. I'd kept my business accounts under my own name from the start because that's just smart business. But we had one joint account for the mortgage and utilities, sitting around $11,000. I moved my half out the morning we filed, left her half untouched, because I wasn't trying to leave her broke. I was trying to leave her honest. There's a difference. The day the papers were ready, I didn't say anything dramatic. No cake, no big speech. I just left them on the kitchen table before I left for a job site, next to her coffee mug, on top of a printed screenshot of the message where she said she felt more like herself with Grant than with me. She called me 11 times before noon. I let every single one go to voicemail. Update 1, 4 days later. She showed up at a job site. Actually showed up, in her work clothes, mascara already halfway down her face, standing next to my truck while I was elbow deep in someone's furnace. My client, a very sweet 70-year-old woman named Dot, poked her head out and asked if everything was okay. I told her it was fine, just a personal matter, and stepped outside. Melissa started immediately. "You can't just leave papers on the table and disappear." I didn't disappear. I went to work. You remember work, the place you weren't actually at 4 separate weekends this year. Her face did this thing where it tried to look shocked and guilty at the same time, and it just came out looking constipated. "I don't know what you think you found, but Grant," I said. "I think I found Grant, and the hotels, and the corporate card fraud, which, by the way, I forwarded a copy of that receipt trail to his HR department this morning, purely out of civic duty." She went white. Actual, cartoonish, blood-drained from the face white. "You didn't." "I did. Anonymously, of course. Wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. Daniel, that could get him fired." "Good. Maybe then he can focus full-time on ruining somebody else's marriage instead of doing it on his lunch break." She started crying right there in the parking lot, which, credit where it's due, was probably her best move of the whole conversation, if I were the kind of guy who caved to tears. I am not that guy. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to finish. "I made a mistake," she said. "One mistake." 4 months of texts calling it a mistake is generous. I'd call it a whole second relationship, with hotel receipts and a bracelet, which, side note, looks great, very tasteful. Tell Grant he has good taste for a guy who apparently thought a burner phone in a glove box was foolproof. You went through my things? And there it was, my personal favorite move in this entire genre of conversation, the pivot to my crime instead of hers. I almost applauded. "Your things were in my car, which I was jumping, because your battery died while you went to have dinner with your work husband. So yes, I found things, and I'm so glad I did, because otherwise I'd have spent another 6 months thinking Tuesday nights were normal and you were just tired from work." She sat down on the curb, actually sat, like her legs gave out. "I love you. This doesn't mean I don't love you. Melissa, I've read the texts. You told him I was emotionally checked out. You told him you felt more like yourself with him than you have with me in years. That is not a woman describing a mistake. That's a woman describing an exit plan. I just found the paperwork before you finished writing it." She didn't have a response for that one. First time in the whole conversation, she didn't have a comeback ready. I went back inside and finished Dot's furnace. Dot, bless her, made me a cup of tea afterward and told me her first husband cheated too, back in 1974, and that some things never change. I told her I appreciated the solidarity. Update 2, 1 week later. Her mother called. Carol, sweet woman, in theory. But she'd clearly gotten the heavily edited version of events, because her opening line was, "Daniel, honey, don't you think this is a bit extreme over one indiscretion?" I said, "Carol, did she mention the 4 months? The hotels? The company credit card? Or just the one indiscretion part?" Silence. "She said you two had grown apart," Carol offered weakly. "We grew apart because she was spending Tuesday nights growing closer to her boss. There's a difference between growing apart and actively choosing a different direction." Carol tried a few more angles. The "you're throwing away 6 years" angle, the "marriage takes work" angle, the classic "everyone makes mistakes" angle, which I was really starting to think should be retired as a defense entirely, because nobody accidentally books a hotel room 4 separate times. That's not a mistake. That's a subscription. Eventually, she landed on, "What about counseling?" Carol, I'd consider counseling for a marriage where trust got broken by accident, a lie that spiraled, something human. This wasn't that. This was a parallel relationship with a shared calendar. I'm not going to therapy to process someone else's affair schedule. She hung up shortly after that. Melissa's sister, Paige, tried a slightly more aggressive version of the same call 2 days later, accusing me of being cold and calculated for planning all this behind her back, which I found genuinely funny, considering the entire situation started because Melissa planned something behind my back for 4 straight months. I told Paige that if she wanted to be mad at someone for planning things quietly, she should maybe start with her sister and Grant's shared hotel loyalty account. She didn't have a response either. Seems to be a family trait, running out of comebacks the moment actual facts get involved. Update 3, 2 weeks later. This is where it stopped being sad and started being genuinely entertaining, because Grant, it turns out, did get fired. Not immediately for the affair. Companies don't usually care about that part, but the corporate card fraud was very much their problem. And once HR started pulling his expense reports, they found enough irregular charges to walk him out with a box the same week. His wife, a woman I'd never met but who I now consider an honorary war buddy, found out everything within days, because apparently nothing stays quiet in a company that size once HR starts asking questions. She reached out to me. Cold message, no context needed. "I think we should compare notes." We did. Turns out Grant had been running this exact playbook for over a year, with at least one other coworker before Melissa, according to messages his wife had found buried in an old email account he forgot to log out of. Melissa wasn't the first. She wasn't special. She was just the current one. I told her that during our next conversation, mostly because I'm not a cruel person by nature, but I did think she deserved to know the full shape of the thing she'd blown up her marriage for. She didn't take it well. "You're lying." she said. He told me I was different. He said what we had was real. He also told at least one other woman that, according to his wife, who has messages predating yours by a full year. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you keep acting like this was some grand love story instead of the guy's established pattern. She went quiet on the phone for a long time. Then, very small, she said, I gave up everything for this. No, I said. You gave up everything for a guy who does this on a schedule. I didn't take anything from you. You handed it to him. Update 4, 3 weeks later. The financial side started moving in earnest. My attorney Renata had built the case around 3 main pillars: documented infidelity with a paper trail, misuse of shared assets to fund the affair, meaning those hotel and gift charges I'd tracked, and a clean, separate property argument for my business, which I'd built 2 years before we even got married and kept financially separate the entire time. Thank God for boring, cautious past me. Melissa's attorney tried to argue for a larger share of the house equity, claiming she'd contributed equally over the years. Renata calmly laid out 6 years of mortgage statements, showing my business income covering roughly 70% of every payment, alongside those 4 hotel charges paid from our joint account during the exact months she claimed financial hardship justified more support. The judge, during our first hearing, actually paused reading the exhibit list and asked, out loud, the petitioner is requesting spousal support while Exhibit 14 shows repeated hotel charges to a third party during the marriage? Her attorney visibly deflated. Renata, next to me, didn't even smile. She just made a small note in the margin of her legal pad, which somehow felt more satisfying than any smug reaction could have. Melissa's demands started shrinking almost weekly after that. What began as a request for half the house equity, spousal support for 2 years, and a share of my business valuation turned, over the course of a month, into a much quieter ask: just the equity split on the house, no support, no business claim. Renata still fought the equity number down further using the mortgage contribution records, and we landed on a 70-30 split in my favor, finalized without a full trial. Update 5, 5 weeks later. Grant's wife filed for divorce the same week mine finalized paperwork prep. She texted me a photo of her own settlement papers with the caption, "Cheers to freedom," and I genuinely laughed out loud for the first time in a month. We still check in occasionally. Nothing weird, just 2 people who survived the same guy's spreadsheet of a personality and came out the other side, comparing notes like war veterans. Melissa moved into her sister's spare room. I heard, secondhand through Carol, who apparently couldn't help herself even after everything, that Grant tried reaching out to Melissa once he was unemployed and freshly served with his own divorce papers, presumably looking for a soft landing spot now that his wife was done funding his lifestyle. Melissa, to her credit, or maybe just her exhaustion, told him to lose her number. Small victories, I guess, even if they came about 4 months too late. Final update. The divorce finalized 6 weeks after I found that phone in the glove box. No trial, no dramatic courtroom moment, just signatures and a judge moving on to the next case on his docket like our entire marriage was just another Tuesday for him, which, honestly, felt appropriate, because our marriage had apparently just been another Tuesday for her too. I kept the house. I kept my business, obviously, since it was never really up for debate once the paperwork came out. She kept her car, her half of the joint savings after the hotel charges were deducted, and whatever dignity she could scrape together walking out of that courthouse. She tried to reach out once more, about 2 weeks after everything was final. A text, not a call, said she'd been thinking about everything, that she was in therapy now, actually working on herself, and that she hoped someday I could see that the person who did all that wasn't really her. I read it twice. Then I did something I hadn't done with any of her messages in almost 2 months. I didn't respond at all. Not out of spite, honestly, just because there was nothing left to say. You don't owe closure to someone who spent 4 months building a second life behind your back and then kissed you goodbye every morning like it was nothing. My brother-in-law asked me recently if I felt any satisfaction watching it all fall apart for her. Grant losing his job, his marriage ending too, her demands shrinking week by week until there was nothing left to negotiate. Honestly, Not really. Not in the vindictive way people probably expect. Mostly, I just felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a version of my life that wasn't actually true. And once I put it down, everything got quieter and easier to breathe in. I still keep that folder, by the way. Tabbed, dated, organized. Not because I need it anymore, the case is closed, but because it reminds me of something simple. The truth doesn't need volume. It doesn't need a scene in a kitchen or a screaming match at 2 a.m. Sometimes the truth just needs a quiet week, a good folder, and a lawyer who knows how to read a receipt. These days, I'm back to normal life, work, my own place, actual peace in the evenings for the first time in longer than I want to admit. Started fixing up an old truck in my garage on weekends. Something to keep my hands busy that has nothing to do with anyone else's decisions but mine. It's slow going, but it's mine. No split custody on the engine parts. No joint account funding somebody else's hotel weekends. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's not really about revenge, even though I know that's the part everyone wants. It's this. Trust your gut the second something feels off, and then don't say a word until you've got the facts locked down. Emotions get you a screaming match. Documentation gets you a settlement. Pick your weapon wisely. And if you ever find a second phone in a glove box labeled Pylades, do yourself a favor. Don't confront anyone in the driveway. Go home, make a copy of everything, and call a lawyer in the morning. That's the whole story. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling me what you would have done differently. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this is not the last folder I've ever built, and it definitely won't be the last one I tell you about. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves, and always, always check the glove box.